My name is Sutton Yates. I'm 32 years old. I live in Springfield, Missouri. And for most of my adult life, I've made a living doing what no one in my family ever believed I could: saving companies that are already halfway to dying. I'm a freelance CFO, the kind people call when payroll is about to bounce, when banks stop returning emails, when founders sit across from me, pale and shaking, asking if there's any way out. Ironically, the company that would nearly destroy me wasn't one of my clients. It was my family's. The dinner was supposed to be simple. Just an ordinary family meal on a quiet weekend. No celebration, no announcement, no reason to brace myself. We sat around the old dining table, the one my father refused to replace because it had history. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans cooked too long. My father cleared his throat. He didn't look nervous. He didn't hesitate. He looked straight at me and said, "We know you helped the company get through the crisis, but we've decided to hand Yates Trucking over to your younger brother after he graduates." The words didn't land slowly. They hit all at once, like being slapped in front of a room full of people who pretend not to notice. Before I could even process that sentence, my stepmother Yvonne leaned forward and added calmly, "And Vaughn would really prefer you not attend the inauguration ceremony. It's his moment. We don't want distractions." I remember staring at the steam rising from my plate. I remember thinking how strange it was that my hands didn't shake, because inside, something had gone completely still. 10 months earlier, I had single-handedly kept Yates Trucking alive. I had poured $1.8 million of my own money into that company. Money I had earned alone, money no one had helped me build. I signed every document they slid across the table because I believed I was protecting a family legacy. That night, I realized the truth. I wasn't protecting anything. I was clearing the runway for the son they had always chosen. 3 days after Vaughn's big inauguration ceremony, their entire empire would collapse. And this time, I would not stop it. I was never the child they showed off. My biological mother died when I was 3 years old. I barely remember her voice, just the smell of her perfume and the way she used to hum while brushing my hair. A few years later, my father remarried Yvonne. When my brother Vaughn was born, I was 10. That's when my role was assigned. I became the helper, the buffer, the responsible one. While Vaughn grew up with brand new cleats, private coaches, and out-of-state tournaments, I was folding laundry, packing lunches, and driving him to practice so Yvonne could keep her social calendar full. Anytime I complained, my father's response never changed. "You're the big sister." Set the example. The $2.9 million from my mother's life insurance, along with the college fund she had explicitly created for me, disappeared without explanation. Questions were labeled selfish. Concerns were brushed off as family investments. By the time I understood what had really happened, the money was gone, and I learned a lesson that would shape my entire life. Fighting only made things harder. So at 18, I left. One duffel bag. No safety net. No goodbyes. Community college by day. Warehouse graveyard shifts by night. Weekend catering gigs. I paid my own tuition. Passed the CPA exam on the first try. Built my career line by line. 10 years later, I lived 3 hours away in Springfield, with savings no one else could touch, and a life I had built entirely on my own terms. That's when my phone rang. It was 2:13 a.m. My father's name lit up my screen. I almost let it go to voicemail. When I answered, his voice cracked immediately. Yates Trucking had missed 2 loan payments. Trucks were grounded. Suppliers demanded cash up front. The bank was preparing to seize everything. "We're gonna lose the house," he said. "The business. Everything." For the first time in my life, my father sounded small. I could have hung up. Instead, I liquidated long-term investments, sold stock I had been holding since my first big contract, and wired $1.8 million. Almost everything I had except my emergency fund. I flew in that same week and spent 7 straight days in their office on Commercial Street, renegotiating with lenders and vendors until the company could breathe again. My father kept repeating the same phrase: temporary authority, just until things stabilize. He slid a thick authorization agreement across the kitchen table. 70 pages of legal text. I signed every one because I still believed the word temporary. That dinner, the one that was supposed to be a thank you, was where they revealed the truth. Not just about the company, about me. Later that night, before I could even stand up from the table, my Aunt Ivy Harper, my mother's younger sister, pulled me onto the back porch. She pressed a worn leather folder into my hands. "You need to see this," she whispered. Now, inside were bank statements spanning nearly 30 years. Letters in my mother's handwriting. Legal documents with official seals I had never known existed. The life insurance payout had never been used for family expenses. It had been systematically transferred into accounts controlled by my father and Yvonne. Every dollar. European vacations, private school tuition, down payments on trucks, all funded by money meant for my future. My aunt's voice shook as she spoke. "Your mother made me promise to give you these when you were ready to fight." That night, I sat at my kitchen table until dawn, and on page 47 of the agreement I had signed to save the company, I found the clause that changed everything. If the company met certain benchmarks within 12 months, full ownership transferred permanently to my father or his chosen successor. Those benchmarks had been met 3 weeks earlier. They weren't planning to thank me. They were planning to erase me. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table until the sun came up. The leather folder spread open in front of me like a crime scene. Bank statements, transfer records, handwritten notes from a woman who had loved me enough to plan for a future she would never get to see. My mother had trusted them, and they had treated that trust like loose change. By 3 in the morning, my shock had burned off. What remained was something colder, clearer, dangerous in its calm. Because once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. And once you stop hoping people will change, you finally become free to act. The last thing I found before closing the folder was a detail so small it almost slipped past me. A routing note. When I wired the $1.8 million to rescue Yates Trucking, the funds didn't go directly to the bank. They moved through an LLC. An LLC I had set up years earlier for tax efficiency, one I hadn't thought about since. I stared at the screen, heart slowing instead of racing. At 8:07 a.m., I called Grant Ramsey. Grant wasn't just an attorney. He was the kind of lawyer companies hired when they were already bleeding. We'd worked together on restructurings, debt rollovers, ugly creditor disputes. He answered on the second ring. I told him everything. I didn't cry. I didn't editorialize. I laid it out like a balance sheet. When I finished, there was silence on the line. Then he said quietly, "Clear your afternoon. I'm coming to you." Grant arrived with 2 associates and spent 6 straight hours tearing through every document. By evening, he leaned back in his chair and smiled the first real smile I'd seen since that dinner. "Sutton," he said, "you didn't just save the company. You accidentally became its largest creditor. The LLC I owned outright had become the primary lien holder on every major loan Yates Trucking carried. They hadn't just used my money, they had handed me control." That was the moment I made my decision. I wasn't going to beg for fairness. I wasn't going to demand gratitude. I wasn't going to confront them emotionally and hope they felt remorse. I was going to let the system they abused do exactly what it was designed to do. For 4 months, I disappeared from their radar. Grant laid out the plan in steps so precise it felt surgical. Step 1, confirm ownership. We ran quiet title searches on every loan Yates Trucking carried, every signature, every amendment, every payment history. The pattern was undeniable. Money meant for my future had funded their present. Step 2, consolidate power. I set up 3 additional holding companies in different states. Clean structures, no emotional ties. Then I began buying the remaining debt piece by piece. Banks were happy to unload. Lenders didn't ask questions when cash appeared quickly and cleanly. By the end of the 3rd month, I owned 100% of the outstanding debt, which meant I controlled the timeline. Meanwhile, my family was planning a celebration. Invitations went out for Vaughn's black tie inauguration ceremony at the University Center in downtown Springfield. 300 guests. Local politicians, suppliers, Chamber of Commerce members. My stepmother sent photos of Vaughn practicing his acceptance speech in the mirror, captioned with smiling emojis and the words, "Future CEO." I saved every one. At night, after client calls, I stood in front of my mirror rehearsing. Not rage, not vengeance, authority. Grant printed fresh copies of every agreement, every clause they had buried, and organized them into a leather binder thin enough to carry in one hand. We rehearsed the order of documents, the timing, the exact sentence, I would say. I also watched the company closely. Weekly financial reports still landed in my inbox, access I had never revoked. Revenue looked healthy. Cash flow was razor thin, the most fragile kind of success. By the time the final invitation arrived, addressed only to my father and Yvonne, I had everything in place. The binder sat ready on my desk. The bank representative confirmed his attendance. And I chose the navy dress that made me look like I already owned the room. They thought they were celebrating a beginning. They had no idea they were walking into the end. The day of the inauguration arrived cold and clear, the kind of Missouri morning that looks harmless but bites if you're not prepared. I woke up before my alarm. No racing heart, no shaking hands, just a steady awareness that today something irreversible would happen. I dressed slowly, black heels, navy dress, hair pulled back, not severe, not soft, controlled. I looked like someone who knew exactly why she was walking into a room. Because I did. The University Center ballroom was already buzzing when I arrived. 300 guests sat at round tables draped in white linen. A string quartet played softly near the windows. Champagne flutes clinked. Laughter rose and fell in waves. Behind the stage hung a massive banner. Yates Trucking, Von Yates, Chief Executive Officer. Fresh ink, fresh lies. My father moved through the crowd like a man reborn. He shook hands, accepted congratulations, told the same story over and over how proud he was to pass the torch, how this was the natural order of things. Yvonne glided beside him in a champagne-colored gown, soaking in compliments as if she had earned every one. Vaughn stood near the podium, adjusting his tie, smiling too much, practicing confidence he hadn't built yet. Photographers crouched for angles. Phones hovered, ready. I waited in the hallway until the lights dimmed slightly, the signal that the ceremony was about to begin. Then I walked in. Conversations faded as I moved down the center aisle. Heads turned, whispers rippled. My father spotted me first. He froze mid-handshake. The color drained from his face so fast it startled me. Yvonne's smile didn't fade, it locked, like porcelain about to crack. Vaughn looked up from his notes and went completely still. I stopped 10 feet from the stage, right where everyone could see me. The MC, a local news anchor my father had hired, cleared his throat and leaned toward the microphone. That was my cue. "Good evening," I said calmly. Grant had arranged it, so my voice carried clearly through the sound system the second I spoke. "My name is Sutton Yates." A murmur rolled through the room, and as of this morning, I hold 100% of the outstanding debt on Yates Trucking. Silence. Not dramatic silence. The kind that makes people stop breathing. Phones rose instantly. Recording. Streaming. Sending. I turned slightly toward the man standing at the edge of the stage, the bank's senior vice president, flown in that morning. He stepped forward, folder in hand. "As of 9 a.m. today," he said, evenly, "all loans secured by Yates Trucking assets have been assigned to entities fully controlled by Miss Sutton Yates." Gasps rippled outward. The company now has 90 days to satisfy the full balance. Failure to do so will result in immediate foreclosure on all vehicles, warehouses, and accounts receivable. A champagne flute slipped from someone's hand and shattered on the marble floor. The sound echoed. My father surged forward, shouting, demanding security, "Remove me," calling it a stunt, a betrayal. No one moved. Yvonne clutched Vaughn's arm so tightly her knuckles went white, whispering something frantic that made him look smaller by the second. My brother didn't say a word. He just stared. I lifted the final page of the binder, the document, showing my LLC as primary lien holder on every asset, and held it up for cameras. "You wanted a transition of power," I said calmly. "This is it." People began standing almost at once. Suppliers who had been clapping minutes earlier checked their phones with growing alarm. Local officials slipped out side doors without eye contact. Within minutes, half the ballroom was empty. The rest followed. The celebration collapsed in real time. Photographers abandoned the stage and turned their lenses on me instead. Flashes lit the room like lightning. By the time security approached to ask if intervention was needed, there was almost no audience left to manage. Only the truth. 3 days later, foreclosure notices arrived by certified mail. Trucks were repossessed from customer lots before drivers finished their coffee. Warehouse doors were padlocked. Payroll bounced. By the end of the week, Yates Trucking was a name people spoke in the past tense. And the town watched it happen. Federal investigators showed up at my father's house one quiet morning. 2 agents. Dark suits, polite questions. They asked about financial records going back 30 years, about transfers, about personal expenses covered by company accounts. My father answered for 4 hours. Yvonne shredded a tissue into dust. The house followed the business into foreclosure. They had 30 days to vacate. Phones stopped ringing. Invitations disappeared. Credit cards declined at grocery registers. They moved into a 1-bedroom apartment above a laundromat. The smell of detergent and fried food seeped through thin walls day and night. Vaughn disappeared into friends' couches and temporary jobs. His degree useless now. The legacy they built on my silence collapsed under its own weight. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I simply let consequences finish what truth had started. The text came 3 weeks after the foreclosure. 1 sentence. No greeting. We need to talk. I stared at the screen longer than I should have. Not because I was afraid, but because I finally understood something most people never do. You don't owe closure to people who never gave you safety. Still, I agreed. Not for them, for myself. We met at a small coffee shop on Commercial Street on a quiet Saturday morning. Burnt coffee, cinnamon rolls, old men reading newspapers at the counter. I took the corner table with my back to the wall. They arrived one by one, my father first, shoulders rounded, jacket hanging loose on a frame that had lost its authority. Yvonne followed, clutching her purse like a life raft, eyes darting around as if shame were contagious. Fun came last. Hands buried in his pockets, hair unwashed, eyes fixed on the floor. No one ordered anything. My father cleared his throat twice before speaking. He said everything they had ever said before, that it was all for the family, that I misunderstood their intentions, that if I had just been more reasonable, none of this would have happened. Yvonne cried softly and insisted the money had stayed in the family, as if that made theft gentler. Vaughn never spoke. I let them finish. Then I said quietly, "You spent 30 years teaching me where I ranked in that house." They went still. "You took the insurance money my mother left for me. You took the college fund she created in my name. You used it to give Vaughn everything I was denied." My father tried to interrupt. I didn't stop. "When I finally built something of my own and used it to save the company you were about to lose, you decided that sacrifice entitled you to erase me." I slid a plain white envelope across the table. Inside was a single sheet prepared weeks earlier. Full repayment terms, forfeiture of remaining assets, and a signed agreement never to contact me again. "This is the last conversation we will ever have," I said calmly. "Sign it or don't. The outcome doesn't change." My father's hands shook as he reached for the envelope. He started to say, "family." I stood up and walked out. I didn't block them out of anger. I blocked them because silence is sometimes the healthiest boundary. What I know about their lives came from public records and occasional updates I never asked for. My father took a night job as a warehouse security guard. Yvonne worked early shifts as a cashier at a big box store off Glenstone, scanning groceries for people who used to attend her parties. Vaughn stocked shelves at a distribution center 40 minutes away. Their names carried weight now, but not the kind they wanted. Failure doesn't destroy people. Exposure does. 1 year later, I stood at my mother's grave in Maple Park Cemetery. I brought fresh flowers and peace. With the settlement money, I founded the Harper Second Chance Fund, named after my mother's maiden name. We help women who have been financially abused by their families quietly, methodically, legally. Within the first year, we recovered over $4 million for 23 clients across Missouri and Arkansas. My practice grew. I chose my clients, set my hours, bought the small house with the wide porch I'd driven past for years. Aunt Ivy moved into the guest suite downstairs. For the first time in my life, home meant safety instead of survival. If you're a woman between 25 and 45, working yourself to exhaustion for people who treat your sacrifice as expected, hear this. Being loyal doesn't require being disposable. Being kind doesn't mean being unprotected. And choosing yourself is not betrayal. Some wounds don't need forgiveness. They need distance, justice, and the courage to build something new on ground that finally belongs to you. If this story felt familiar, you're not alone. And you're not wrong for wanting more. Sometimes, the bravest thing a woman can do is stop being useful and start being free.